People like you don't belong here, the director sneered, drenching the woman in ice water. In the silent, marble lobby, 15 smartphones were already recording. The director smiled, utterly unaware she had just destroyed her own career. The polished glass doors of Apex Innovations hissed open, admitting Dr. Lena Williams into a cathedral of corporate ambition. The Austin sun, fierce and white-hot, even in late afternoon, was instantly tamed by the lobby's cool, conditioned air. It was a space designed to intimidate and impress in equal measure. Floors of Italian marble stretched out like a frozen lake, reflecting the abstract, gallery-worthy paintings that adorned the towering walls. A monolithic reception desk, carved from a single block of black granite, sat beneath a cascading chandelier that looked like a captured supernova. Lena clutched the custom-insulated tote bag, its contents more precious than any corporate asset in the building. Inside, nestled in a container, was a generous portion of her family's jambalaya, the recipe passed down through 4 generations of Louisiana women. The rich, spicy aroma of andouille sausage, shrimp, and the holy trinity of vegetables was perfectly sealed, a secret celebration waiting to be unveiled. Today was her 5th wedding anniversary with Julian, and this surprise lunch was a tradition she cherished, a small, tangible piece of their shared life smuggled into the sterile world of tech he commanded. Her lucid air, a sleek marvel of engineering with a license plate, JNL 4EVR, was parked in the visitor section. It was an anniversary gift from Julian, a silent testament to their partnership. As she approached the granite fortress of the reception desk, her heels, a modest but elegant pair of Jimmy Choos, clicked with a soft, confident rhythm against the stone. She carried a handcrafted leather tote from the row, a bag that whispered its expense rather than shouted it, its clean lines and perfect stitching a reflection of her own understated style. A young woman with a meticulously practiced corporate smile looked up from her screen. "Welcome to Apex Innovations. How can I help you?" "Hello," Lena said, her own smile genuine and warm. "I'm here to see Julian Carter. It's a personal visit." The receptionist, whose name tag read Chloe, typed a few keystrokes. "Do you have an appointment, ma'am?" "No, I don't. It's a surprise, actually. I'm sorry, but Mr. Carter's schedule is... The CEO doesn't take unscheduled meetings." The voice was sharp, cutting through the lobby's ambient hum like a shard of glass. Karen Miller materialized beside the desk, as if summoned by the mere mention of an unscheduled visitor. She was the director of talent acquisition, a woman who wore her authority like a suit of armor. Today, it was a charcoal gray power suit with shoulders sharp enough to cut diamonds. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a severe bun, and her arms were crossed, a posture of perpetual judgment. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, raked over Lena from head to toe, a silent, invasive audit. The appraisal was swift and dismissive. It took in Lena's dark skin, her tastefully styled braids, the elegant but not flashy dress, and the expensive but unbranded bag. The conclusion was instantaneous and absolute. "Understand he's busy," Lena said, maintaining her polite composure. "But this is a very special occasion. If you could just let him know." "Special occasion?" Karen's voice was lacquered with skepticism. She let the words hang in the air, a clear insinuation. "And what, exactly, is your business with Mr. Carter?" "As I said, it's personal," Lena repeated, her grip tightening slightly on the strap of her tote. The warmth she had entered with was beginning to chill under Karen's hostile gaze. Karen let out a short, theatrical laugh, turning her head just enough to ensure the handful of employees milling about the lobby could see her performance. "Personal, right? Let me guess, another woman with personal business trying to get a piece of the pie. We see it all the time." A flush of heat crept up Lena's neck. She had a PhD in sociology from Yale, had published papers on systemic inequality, and had consulted for nonprofits dedicated to workplace equity. She understood the dynamics at play with academic precision, but the raw, personal sting of prejudice was something theory could never fully inoculate against. "I'm his wife," she said, her voice quiet but firm. The statement was met with another bark of laughter from Karen, louder this time, designed to draw more attention. "His wife?" "Julian Carter's wife." She gestured dramatically at Lena, then to the small but growing audience of interns and junior developers. "Does she look like the wife of a billionaire CEO to you people?" The question hung in the air, ugly and loaded. A few of the younger employees exchanged uncomfortable glances. Others, new to the corporate world, simply stared, their faces blank slates, waiting to be written on by the person in power. And in that moment, the person in power was Karen Miller. Lena's fingers tightened on her bag. Inside, her phone buzzed. A text from Julian. "Can't wait for lunch. Counting the minutes. Love you." The irony was a bitter pill. He was upstairs, counting the minutes to see her, while down here, she was being publicly dissected and dismissed by one of his own directors. The jambalaya in her bag suddenly felt heavy, its warmth a stark contrast to the ice-cold humiliation washing over her. The audience in the lobby was growing. What had been a handful of employees was now a dozen, drawn by the magnetic pull of a public confrontation. Smartphones, previously tucked away, began to emerge, held discreetly at first, then more brazenly. The little red dot of a recording in progress was a modern-day mark of Cain, branding the moment for digital eternity. "Women like you," Karen continued, her voice rising, feeding off the attention, "are always looking for a handout. Gold diggers, social climbers, you have a dozen different names, but the game is always the same." Each word was a carefully aimed dart, intended to pierce Lena's composure. Lena stood her ground, her posture straight, her chin level. She had faced down hostile academic panels and condescending foundation boards. She would not crumble in a corporate lobby. Still, the public nature of the assault was a new kind of violation. The silent judgment of the onlookers, their gazes a mixture of pity, morbid curiosity, and secondhand embarrassment, felt like a physical weight. "Ma'am," a deep voice said reluctantly. A security guard, his uniform crisp, approached the scene. His name tag read Frank. He was a man in his late 50s with kind eyes that were currently filled with deep unease. He had worked at Apex for a decade and had seen the Carter family at company picnics and holiday parties. Something about this woman was familiar, but Karen Miller was his superior's boss, a link in the chain of command he knew better than to challenge. "Frank, perfect timing," Karen announced, her tone triumphant. "Please escort this woman out. She's creating a disturbance and harassing the staff." "I am not harassing anyone," Lena stated, her voice a marvel of control. The fire of indignation burned at her chest, but she refused to let it show. "I brought my husband lunch for our anniversary." To prove her point, she pulled out her phone. The lock screen was a photo of her and Julian from last year's company gala. They were laughing, his arm wrapped securely around her waist, the city lights of Austin twinkling behind them. It was a picture of unguarded joy and deep affection. Karen barely glanced at it. Photoshopped, the desperation is almost impressive. She waved a dismissive hand. "You people are getting so clever with technology these days. You people." The phrase landed with the force of a physical blow. It was a lazy, catch-all dismissal, a verbal tool to erase her individuality, her accomplishments, her very identity. Dr. Lena Williams, a sociologist, an author, a wife, a woman who had spent her life studying the nuances of language and power, was reduced to 2 words. To Karen Miller, she was not a person, she was a type. A soft gasp came from a woman standing near the reception desk. It was Maria, a longtime administrative assistant. She had worked at Apex since it was a startup in a garage. She remembered when Julian started dating Lena. She had seen their wedding photos. She knew exactly who was standing in the lobby, dripping with invisible wounds. "The security cameras are recording all of this," Maria whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Karen whirled on her, her eyes flashing. "Recording what? Me doing my job? Me protecting our CEO from a professional grifter?" More employees had gathered, forming a semicircle. The lunch crowd was returning from the cafeteria, their chatter dying down as they took in the tense tableau. A group of software engineers, drawn by the commotion, stood near the elevators, their expressions unreadable. Lena, check her watch. 3:10 p.m. Julian's board meeting was scheduled to end in 5 minutes. Her plan had been so simple. Surprise him as he came downstairs for their prearranged lunch. Now, that plan was a heap of smoking rubble. "Look," she said, her voice strained. She pulled her car keys from her tote. The fob for the lucid air caught the light, engraved with the intertwined trunks of a baobab and an oak tree. A custom design symbolizing their African and American roots. "I can call him right now." "Don't you dare," Karen snapped, her authority absolute. She turned back to the security guard. "Frank, I gave you an order. Remove her. Now." Frank shifted on his feet, his discomfort palpable. Company policy was clear: follow directives from HR. But his gut screamed that this was wrong. The woman carried herself with a quiet dignity that contradicted every accusation Karen hurled at her. The expensive, understated clothes, the custom jewelry, the calm in the face of public humiliation. It didn't add up. "Ma'am," he said gently to Lena, avoiding her eyes. "Perhaps you could just wait outside, and we could try to sort this out." "She's not waiting anywhere but the curb," Karen interrupted, her voice sharp as a razor. "This is what happens when people forget their place." The phrase hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Several employees visibly winced. 2 junior developers, emboldened by the sheer audacity of the scene, raised their phones and began recording openly. The first live stream had begun. Lena's wedding ring, a custom piece Julian had designed himself, caught the light as she steadied her hand against the granite desk. It was a miniature sculpture of a baobab and an oak tree, their branches intertwined, a symbol of their 2 worlds merging into one. Julian wore a matching one on his left hand, a detail visible in every press photo, every quarterly report, every televised interview. It was a detail Karen Miller had either never noticed or never cared to. To her, details were irrelevant when a stereotype was so much easier to process. 8 minutes until the anniversary surprise was supposed to happen. Now, it was just a countdown to a disaster of unknown proportions. "I'm calling the police," Karen announced loudly, though Frank stood right beside her. "We'll have her removed for trespassing." The threat was designed to be the final, crushing blow. Lena felt the walls of the lobby closing in. 15 people were watching her, their faces a gallery of reactions. Her anniversary surprise had morphed into a public spectacle of humiliation. "Please," she said, her voice barely a whisper now, the fight draining out of her. "Just call Julian's office. Tell his assistant that Lena is here." Karen smiled, a cold, thin line. She reached into the small, stainless steel refrigerator behind the reception desk where staff kept their drinks. Her hand emerged with a bottle of Fiji water. "No," she said, her voice dripping with finality as she unscrewed the cap. "I think you're leaving, one way or another." The implication was clear. But before Lena could process it, Maria, the administrative assistant, found a sliver of courage. She stepped forward, clutching her tablet like a shield. "Karen, wait," she pleaded, her voice shaking. "The visitor log. I checked the visitor log." Karen paused, the open water bottle in her hand. "The what?" "The visitor log," Maria repeated, her finger trembling as she swiped on the screen. "There's an appointment for a Dr. L. Williams at 3:15 p.m. The meeting is with Mr. Carter. It's marked personal lunch." The lobby fell silent. Even the distant hum of the building's HVAC system seemed to fade away. All eyes were on the tablet in Maria's hands. Karen snatched the device, her perfectly manicured fingers scrolling frantically through the appointment system. And there it was, in crisp, undeniable text. 3:15 p.m. to 4:45 p.m. Personal meeting, Julian Carter. Visitor, Dr. L. Williams. Internal notes, exec assist view, only anniversary surprise. Dr. Williams bringing homemade lunch, jambalaya. Please block 90 minutes. No interruptions. Dr. Williams. The title stared back at her. The notes were damningly specific. The dietary preference, the 90-minute block, the all-caps warning against interruptions. This wasn't a random entry. This was integrated into the CEO's personal schedule, logged days in advance. For a long moment, Karen was speechless. The cogs in her brain were grinding, trying to reconcile this data with the narrative she had constructed. The silence stretched, thick with tension. "It's a fake," she finally declared, but her voice had lost its commanding edge. It was brittle, defensive. "Anyone can hack our system. These people, they're more sophisticated than you realize. They plant these things." But the excuse was flimsy, and everyone knew it. Doubt, like a virus, began to spread through the crowd. Whispers erupted. "That's really his wife. Oh my God. Karen she's so fired. This is going to be everywhere." The energy in the room had shifted. The phone cameras, which had been instruments of Lena's humiliation, now felt like weapons aimed directly at Karen. The live stream comments, visible on a nearby intern's phone, began to turn vicious. "CEO's wife? That Karen is about to get canceled. This is insane. She messed up bad." Desperation clawed at Karen's composure. "Fake appointments, fake photos, fake stories," she announced, her voice climbing in pitch. "This is exactly the kind of manipulation I'm trained to prevent. They will stop at nothing to get to successful men." But the evidence was too strong. The appointment log was too detailed. The quiet, unyielding dignity of the woman standing before her was too powerful. Lena, sensing the tide turning, reached in her tote bag with a steady hand. She pulled out her phone again. The lock screen still showed the photo of her and Julian at the gala. But this time, she swiped it open. Her thumb hovered over his contact, listed simply as "my Julian." "I'm calling my husband now," she said calmly. "No!" Karen lunged forward, her hand outstretched, trying to snatch the phone. The mask of corporate authority had shattered, revealing the raw panic beneath. "I forbid you to disturb." Ding! The sound was soft, almost gentle, but it cut through the lobby like a gunshot. Every head, all 25 of them, turned in unison toward the executive elevator bank. The one reserved for the C-suite, the one that required a special keycard for access. The polished steel doors were sliding open. Karen's face went from flushed red to a ghostly white. Time was up. The water bottle in Karen's hand felt impossibly heavy. The plan, so clear just moments ago, had dissolved into chaos. The open bottle was a symbol of her authority, a tool to enforce the natural order of things as she saw it. People like this woman needed to be put in their place, firmly and publicly. It was a lesson, not just for the woman herself, but for everyone watching. A demonstration of who belonged and who did not. But the tablet, the appointment, the murmuring crowd, they were cracks in her perfect, controlled world. Doubt was a poison, and it was spreading fast. She had to reassert control. She had to finish what she started. Her eyes locked on Lena's. In them, she didn't see fear or submission. She saw a quiet, unnerving strength. It infuriated her. It was a defiance she couldn't comprehend. "You are leaving," Karen said, her voice low and menacing. Each word a stone dropped into a silent pool. "Now!" She took a step forward. The crowd instinctively took a step back, creating a small, gladiatorial arena in the center of the marble lobby. The phones remained raised, a silent chorus of digital witnesses. The livestream viewer count ticked past 800. Lena didn't flinch. She simply stood there, a portrait of grace under fire. She had presented her evidence. She had stated her truth. There was nothing left to do but wait for the inevitable collision. And Karen, driven by a cocktail of prejudice, panic, and a desperate need to be right, provided it. She tilted the bottle. Time seemed to warp, stretching and slowing. The clear liquid arced through the air, catching the light from the supernova chandelier and shattering it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. It was almost beautiful, a crystalline ribbon unfurling in slow motion. Lena's eyes widened, not in shock, but in a kind of weary resignation. She had hoped it wouldn't come to this, but she was not surprised. This was the logical conclusion of the dehumanization she had endured for the past 10 minutes. The water hit her with a shocking, icy slap. It wasn't just water. It was a liquid manifestation of contempt. It splashed across her face, stealing her breath. It soaked the front of her silk dress, turning the elegant fabric dark and clinging. It dripped from her chin, tracing a path down her neck. It ran in cold rivulets down her chest, a violation that felt far more intimate than a simple spill. A collective gasp rippled through the lobby. Silence. A profound, echoing silence, broken only by the soft, rhythmic drip, drip, drip of water falling from Lena's dress onto the pristine marble floor. Each drop landed with the weight of a judgment, a tiny, percussive beat counting down to oblivion. Karen Stone stood with the empty bottle still raised, like a hunter posing with her kill. A triumphant, cruel smile played on her lips. That, she announced to her captive audience, her voice ringing with satisfaction, is how we handle trespassers at Apex Innovations. The spell was broken. The dripping water, the shocked faces, the sheer unadulterated audacity of the act. It all came crashing back into real time. "Oh my God," whispered Chloe, the receptionist, her hands flying to her mouth. "Did you really just—" "I did what was necessary." Karen cut her off, her voice sharp and defensive. She turned to address the crowd, her posture radiating self-righteousness. "Let this be a lesson to all of you. We protect our executives. We do not bow to demands from people who think they can just waltz in here and take what isn't theirs." But the faces staring back at her were no longer merely curious or intimidated. They were horrified. The handmade lunch container, forgotten during the escalating conflict, slipped from Lena's wet fingers. It clattered against the marble floor with a sound that made everyone wince, the silver wrapping paper tearing to reveal the corner of a Tupperware box. The scent of home-cooked jambalaya, a scent of love and celebration, was a tragic counterpoint to the scene of cold, corporate cruelty. Frank, the security guard, looked physically ill. His face, normally ruddy, had gone ashen. His hands, which had once held a firearm in the service of his country, trembled slightly at his sides. He had been trained to de-escalate, to protect. He had done neither. He had stood by and watched. The shame was a lead weight in his stomach. "Ms. Miller," he started, his voice hoarse. "Maybe we should call." "Call who, Frank?" Karen's voice echoed in the cavernous space, amplified by the glass and stone. "Show weakness? Let every grifter and gold digger in Austin know that the CEO of Apex is an easy target." More employees, drawn by the commotion, emerged from the elevators and stairwells. The afternoon shift change was bringing a fresh wave of witnesses. Someone's phone buzzed with an incoming notification from friend. "Dude, get to the lobby. You're not going to believe this." A junior developer named Kevin, who had been live-streaming the entire event, held his phone steady. The viewer count had exploded. 827, 1 500, 2 300. The comment section was a waterfall of outrage and disbelief. "Is this real? OMG, she poured water on her. Someone is getting so fired. This is an actual crime. Assault." This woman, Karen gestured at Lena as if she were a piece of evidence in a trial, claims to be Julian Carter's wife. "Look at her." Her voice dripped with disdain. "Does she look like the kind of woman who belongs in the C-suite to you?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. There was a clear, unspoken division forming. The newer hires, who only knew Karen as a figure of authority, looked uncertain, some even nodding slightly in agreement. But the longtime employees, the ones who had been with the company for years, looked on with a mixture of horror and dawning recognition. Maria, the administrative assistant, stepped forward again. Her face was pale, her hands shaking as she clutched her tablet. She had a mortgage. She had a daughter starting college next year. She had a mother whose medications were covered by the company's health insurance. But there was a line, and Karen Miller had just drenched it in ice water. "Karen, I really think you need to know." "Know what, Maria?" Karen whirled on her, a predator sensing a challenge to her authority. "That we should cater to every sob story and fake photo that walks through that door?" Maria's mouth opened, then closed. She had ordered the flowers for Lena's birthday every year. She had scheduled Julian's appointments around their anniversary. She knew, with absolute certainty, that the woman dripping water onto the marble floor was the first lady of Apex Innovations. But fear was a powerful silencer. She took a step back, her eyes downcast, the weight of her silence a fresh shame. For minutes remaining on the countdown clock that only existed in Lena's head, the live stream viewer count hit 3,100. The hashtag Apex Assault was starting to trend on Twitter. Local news bloggers were already getting anonymous tips. Lena finally moved. Slowly, with a grace that seemed impossible under the circumstances, she wiped the water from her eyes with the back of her hand. Her wedding ring, the intertwined baobab and oak, caught the light. It was the same custom design Julian wore. The same ring he'd sketched on a napkin on their third date, explaining how it represented their different backgrounds growing into a single, strong entity. "I would like," she said quietly, her voice carrying across the now silent lobby, "to call my husband now." "Your husband?" Karen laughed, a sound as sharp and unpleasant as breaking glass. "This little fantasy has gone on long enough. Frank, I want her removed. Immediately." She pulled out her own phone, her fingers flying across the screen with theatrical efficiency. "I'm documenting this for the police report. Attempted fraud, corporate harassment, criminal trespassing." Click. Flash. Karen took a photo of Lena's wet face. Click. Flash. Another of her expensive, stained dress. Each flash felt like a fresh assault. "Perfect evidence," Karen muttered, reviewing the images. "Shows exactly what these people will try to get away with." The crowd had now swelled to nearly 30 employees. The workday had effectively ground to a halt. This was better than any reality show. This was real, raw, and happening right in front of them. The air was thick with the promise of an epic conclusion. Shouldn't someone at least call Mr. Carter's office? The question came from a young man named James, a junior developer barely 3 months into his job. He was new enough to still believe in basic fairness, too green to understand the unspoken rule. You don't challenge Karen Miller. "Absolutely not," Karen snapped, rounding on him. "The CEO is in the middle of closing a multi-million-dollar acquisition. He does not have time to be bothered by this." She gestured dismissively at Lena, who stood with a quiet dignity that seemed to infuriate Karen even more. The water had stopped dripping, but the dark stains on her silk dress were a stark testament to the assault. Her hair, which had been professionally styled that morning for her anniversary, now hung in wet, limp strands around her face. "Ma'am," Frank the security guard approached again, his voice barely a whisper. He was trying to find a path through the minefield. "Maybe if we could just verify—" "Frank!" Karen's voice turned to ice, each word a perfectly formed, lethal crystal. "Are you questioning my professional judgment? Are you questioning my authority as a director of this company?" The security guard froze. He had 3 kids, a mortgage on a small house in a suburb he could barely afford, a wife whose diabetes medication cost a fortune without the company's insurance plan. He had seen Karen Miller in careers, not with a bang, but with a whisper, a negative performance review that appeared out of nowhere, a sudden budget cut that eliminated a position just before the holidays, a quiet word in the right ear. He looked at Lena, really looked at her this time. The expensive bag, the custom jewelry, the way she held herself, even now, soaked and humiliated. He saw the faint, familiar lines of her face from the company picnic photos. Then he looked at Karen, at her face contorted with rage and self-importance. He looked at the 30 phones recording his every move. And then he looked at the floor. "No, ma'am," he said quietly, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Karen's triumphant smile returned. She had won. Total victory. Good. Then escort this woman to the parking garage and make sure she understands that she is permanently banned from all Apex Innovations properties. Wait. It was Maria. She found her voice again, stepping forward with the tablet held out in front of her like a shield. Her hands were trembling, but her voice was clear. "The visitor log," she said louder this time. It shows what, Maria?" Karen's eyes narrowed, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper that was far more terrifying than her shouting. Maria's hands shook, but she didn't back down. She turned the screen so that Karen and everyone standing near her could see it clearly. "An appointment," Maria said, her voice gaining strength. For Dr. L. Williams. At 3:15 p.m. For a personal lunch meeting with the CEO. It was scheduled 3 days ago by his executive assistant. The lobby went dead quiet. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. Even the live stream comments seemed to pause for a collective breath. Karen snatched the tablet, her eyes scanning the screen with a growing sense of desperation. There it was, undeniable. The internal notes were a dagger to the heart of her narrative. Anniversary surprise. Dr. Williams bringing homemade lunch. Block 90 minutes. No interruptions. Mrs. Carter. The words weren't there, but the implication was a klaxon horn. The specificity of the entry, the name, the title, the purpose, the duration, was impossible to fake on the fly. This wasn't a hack. This was a plan. A plan Karen had just blown up with a bottle of Fiji water. Doubt, which had been a creeping vine, now became a tidal wave crashing over the onlookers. The whispers started again, but this time they were certain. That's really his wife. Oh God. Oh no. Karen is destroyed. This is going to be on the news by 5. 2 minutes remaining. Karen felt control slipping through her fingers like sand. The phone cameras felt like accusations. The livestream comments were a torrent of condemnation. She's a doctor? Karen is a racist monster. I hope the CEO buries her. Fake appointments, fake photos, fake stories. Karen shrieked, her voice cracking with panic. This is what I'm talking about. These people will stop at nothing. But no one was buying it. Her authority had evaporated. She was no longer a powerful director. She was a cornered animal, lashing out in fear. Lena reached into her tote with steady hands and pulled out her phone. The lock screen showed the photo of her and Julian at the company gala. But it wasn't just any photo. It was the official corporate portrait that hung in the executive boardroom upstairs. The one every single employee had seen 100 times during presentations and all-hands meetings. I'm calling Julian now, she said calmly, her thumb hovering over his contact. No, Karen lunged, a desperate, clumsy movement, trying to grab the phone. I forbid you to disturb. Ding. The soft, mechanical chime of the executive elevator echoed through the marble lobby. Everyone froze. All 30 pairs of eyes swiveled toward the polished steel doors as they began to slide open. Julian Carter stepped out of the elevator, adjusting the cuff of his charcoal suit jacket. At 36, the CEO of Apex Innovations moved with the quiet, unshakable confidence of a man who had built a $2.8 billion company from the ground up in his garage. His custom wedding ring, the intertwined baobab and oak, caught the lobby's afternoon light. He was smiling, anticipating the sight of his wife waiting by the reception desk for their anniversary lunch. Instead, he walked into a scene of bizarre, frozen tension. 30 employees were clustered in a semicircle, their phones held high like torches in the dark. What's going on here? His voice, calm but carrying a natural authority, cut through the whispers and the electronic hum of the lobby. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. And then he saw her, Lena, standing in the center of the circle, water dripping from her hair onto the marble floor. Her beautiful silk dress was soaked, clinging to her skin. Mascara had streaked down her cheeks in dark rivers. The insulated tote bag, the one she'd been so excited about, lay forgotten at her feet, its silver wrapping torn and soggy. Time stopped. The world narrowed to the sight of his wife, humiliated and drenched. Lena, his voice cracked, a fissure in his corporate composure. Baby, what happened? Why are you? He didn't wait for an answer. He crossed the lobby in 3 long strides. The multi-million-dollar acquisition he'd just finalized completely forgotten. His hands found her face, his thumbs gently wiping away the water and smeared makeup. The gesture was instinctive, protective, a private act of love made painfully public. The entire lobby and the thousands watching online saw not a CEO, but husband. He held her face in his hands, his eyes scanning hers for an explanation. Then his gaze lifted, sweeping across the silent, watching crowd. Who did this to you? His voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper, a low-frequency rumble that carried more menace than any shout ever could. The space held its collective breath. The 30 phones continued to record, but the silence was absolute, stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. Lena looked up at him, her own eyes filled with a mixture of love, pain, and relief. "I brought you lunch," she whispered, her voice steady despite everything. "For our anniversary." She took a shaky breath. "Apparently, people like me don't belong here." Julian's eyes, which had been filled with confusion and concern, hardened into chips of obsidian. His gaze swept the crowd again, this time methodically, cataloging every face, every witness to his wife's humiliation. His eyes landed on Karen Miller. The temperature in the lobby seemed to drop 10 degrees. The director of talent acquisition stood frozen, the empty Fiji bottle still clutched in her white-knuckled hand. Her face, which had been flushed with victory just moments before, was now the color of ash. Beads of sweat were forming on her forehead, tracing paths through her expensive foundation. Julian's voice was dangerously quiet, the kind of quiet that preceded a storm. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish, but no sound came out. Employees near her instinctively stepped away, creating a wider circle around her, as if she were radioactive. She was isolated, alone in the center of the judgment she had so freely dispensed. The spell of fear she had cast over the lobby was broken. The truth, now that the CEO was present, came rushing out. Maria, the administrative assistant who had twice tried to intervene, found her voice first. It was clear and strong, amplified by the lobby's acoustics. "Mr. Carter," I tried to tell her. "Ms. Miller threw water on your wife. She called her a gold digger and was trying to have security remove her from the building." Julian's jaw tightened, a muscle flexing along his cheek. He didn't take his eyes off Karen. He pulled a monogrammed handkerchief from his jacket pocket, JNC embroidered in elegant script, and began to gently dab the remaining water from Lena's face and neck. The gesture was tender, intimate, and a stark, damning contrast to Karen's act of violence. Every person in that lobby, every viewer on the live stream, could see the depth of his devotion and the protective fury simmering just beneath the surface. "How long has this been going on?" he asked softly, his voice carefully controlled but vibrating with barely contained rage. "About 20 minutes, Lena replied, her dignity a shield around her. I showed her a photo from the gala. I told her about the appointment in the system. I told her repeatedly that I was your wife. She looked directly at Karen. She called me a liar and said I was using Photoshop to trick you." Julian's breathing changed, becoming deeper, more measured. His colleagues, who had worked with him for years, recognized the signs. The slight tension in his shoulders, the careful modulation of his voice, the way his free hand clenched and unclenched at his side. An angry Julian Parker was a force of nature, but a cold, calculating Julian Parker was infinitely more dangerous. He looked up at the crowd, his gaze sweeping over the phones recording from multiple angles. The Instagram live stream, a small window on an intern's phone showed, had now surpassed 4,200 viewers. "Karen," he said, his voice a winter wind blowing through the lobby. "My office. Now. Mr. Carter. I can't explain." The words tumbled out of Karen's mouth in a desperate, panicked rush. She didn't follow proper protocols. She was being aggressive. Anyone could claim to be. "I said now." But then he paused. He looked down at his wife's stained dress, her ruined hair, and the quiet strength in her eyes that had endured 20 minutes of racist, classist abuse. Something shifted in his expression. The corporate instinct to handle this privately was overridden by a more primal need for public justice. "Actually, no," he said, his voice growing stronger, resonating with authority. "We're not going to my office. We're going to handle this right here, in front of everyone who witnessed what you did." He helped Lena straighten, his arm wrapping securely around her waist, a gesture of both support and possession. Then, he addressed the crowd, his voice now at full CEO volume. "For those of you who don't know," he began, "this is my wife, Dr. Lena Williams. We have been married for 5 years, as of today. This is our wedding anniversary." He paused, letting the words sink in. "She has a PhD in sociology from Yale. She speaks 3 languages. She volunteers with literacy programs for underprivileged children every weekend. His voice gained strength with each word, dismantling the caricature Karen had painted. She came here today to surprise me with lunch. A lunch she woke up at 5 a.m. to prepare herself before I left for my morning conference calls. She brought homemade jambalaya, my favorite, wrapped in silver paper with a handwritten anniversary card. He gestured to the sad, soggy container on the floor. And instead of being welcomed into the building that her husband built, she had ice water thrown in her face, was called a gold digger, and was threatened with arrest. Karen found her voice, desperation making it shrill. Julian, I was protecting you. She didn't identify herself properly. Anyone could just walk in here claiming. She didn't identify herself? Julian's eyebrows rose, his voice dripping with dangerous incredulity. With her appointment clearly listed in our system, with our wedding photos displayed on my desk upstairs, with her name on the permanent visitor access list that you personally approved last year. Karen's face crumbled as the logical holes in her defense became gaping chasms for everyone to see. You processed her health insurance paperwork when she was added to my plan as my spouse, Julian continued, his voice relentless. You have seen her at company Christmas parties, at summer picnics, at board dinners. You didn't recognize her today because you never saw her. You saw a black woman asking for access to power, and you made a decision. You decided she didn't deserve basic human dignity. The raw, unvarnished truth of it hung in the air. Rebecca Stone, he said, his voice carrying the finality of a judge's gavel. You are terminated from Apex Innovations, effective immediately. Julian, please. Karen begged, her career and reputation crashing down around her in a spectacular, live-streamed implosion. It was a misunderstanding. I was just being careful. Careful. It was Lena who spoke. Her voice was soft, but it carried across the silent lobby with the clarity of a bell. She had been the object of the drama, the silent victim. Now, she was its narrator. You were being careful when you call me a gold digger? She asked, her eyes locking with Karen's. When you said, you people don't belong here. When you threw water in my face in front of 30 of your colleagues. Karen opened her mouth, but no sound came out. There was no defense. There was no context that could justify her actions. But Julian wasn't finished. His protective fury, the anger of a husband, was now transforming into something larger, something colder. The strategic response of a CEO. This was no longer just about an assault on his wife. It was an assault on his company, his brand, and his values. And it required a response of overwhelming force. There's something else everyone here needs to know, he said, his arm tightening around Lena's shoulders. The crowd leaned in, sensing another revelation. My wife, Dr. Williams, hasn't just been my partner for the past 5 years. For the past 6 months, she has been conducting independent research, working with workplace equality nonprofits, and documenting patterns of discrimination in corporate hiring practices across the tech industry. He paused, letting the implications of that statement sink in. The live stream comments exploded with speculation. This wasn't just a random visit to bring me lunch, Julian said, his voice dropping slightly for dramatic effect. This was a test. In Apex Innovations, you just failed. Spectacularly. A collective gasp went through the lobby. Karen's legs nearly gave out from under her. The employees who had stood by and watched exchanged glances of horror and dawning fascination. They suddenly understood they had not just witnessed an act of workplace rudeness. They had witnessed the catastrophic conclusion of a covert investigation. My wife, Julian continued, his voice now ringing with the authority of a prosecutor, has documentation of systematically biased interview processes and the deliberate exclusion of qualified minority candidates right here at this company. Today's incident isn't an isolated act of one employee's bad judgment. It is a symptom of a cancer that has been growing within our HR department for the last 2 years. He looked directly at Karen, his eyes burning with cold fire. You have been the gatekeeper. You have been filtering out diversity at the screening level, rejecting hundreds of qualified candidates before they could ever reach the hiring managers in our various departments. And Dr. Williams has the data, the statistics, and the legal evidence to prove it. This was the second bombshell. The live stream comments went from outraged to analytical. The story was no longer just about a Karen. It was about systemic racism. It was spreading beyond social media to news blogs, business publications, and legal networks. Lena, with the calm precision of a scholar presenting her thesis, reached into her still damp tote bag. She pulled out a waterproof folder. She had come prepared. She opened the folder, revealing professionally printed charts and graphs. Her voice was academic, clear, and utterly damning. Over the past 18 months, she began, Apex Innovations received 847 qualified applications from Black candidates for engineering and marketing roles. Of those applications, 731 were rejected at the initial HR screening level, managed by Ms. Miller's department. She held up a chart, a start bar graph showing the disparity. During that same period, 1,203 white candidates with similar or lesser qualifications applied for the same positions. Only 312 were rejected at the HR screening level. The statistical probability of this disparity occurring through random chance is less than 0.003%. The numbers hit the lobby like a physical blow. Several employees gasped audibly. This wasn't an accusation anymore. This was mathematical proof of systemic racism. It was undeniable, overwhelming, and legally catastrophic. This research, Julian added, his voice carrying the weight of federal backing, was conducted in partnership with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. The documentation is legally admissible evidence in a federal court. Karen collapsed into the nearest empty chair, her body finally giving out under the weight of the revelation. 22 years in human resources, a six-figure salary, stock options, a reputation as a tough but effective gatekeeper. All of it had evaporated in 20 minutes because she couldn't see past the color of a woman's skin. The lobby of Apex Innovations had transformed from a corporate showroom into a courtroom, and the verdict was in. Lena's voice, no longer soft, gained the strength of righteous conviction as she delivered the final, human cost of Karen's actions. Every single person you discriminated against had a family to support, bills to pay, a dream they were trying to achieve, she said, her gaze sweeping over the stunned faces of the employees. The only difference between them and the candidates you approved was the color of their skin. She then looked directly at the crowd, at the people who had watched her humiliation unfold. And the only difference between me and them, she added, her voice dropping slightly, is that I have a husband to protect me. But I refuse to let that protection be a privilege wasted on just one person when systemic change can help hundreds. A surge of pride washed over Julian. He looked at the brilliant, courageous woman beside him. She had taken a moment of deep personal pain and was forging it into a tool for societal progress. This was the woman he had fallen in love with. He turned his attention back to the crowd, and by extension, to the thousands watching online. This was a crisis, but it was also an opportunity to lead. Effective immediately, he announced, his voice booming with authority. Apex Innovations will be implementing a complete and comprehensive overhaul of our hiring and HR practices. He began to lay out the plan, each point a decisive strike against the culture that had allowed this to happen. First, we are implementing a blind resume screening process for all applicants. Names, photos, and any demographic identifiers will be automatically removed by new software before any resume reaches a human reviewer. From now on, we hire based on merit, period. Second, we are establishing a $15 million fund. This fund will be used for two purposes: to provide legal assistance and financial support for victims of workplace discrimination across the tech industry, and to fund further independent research into systemic bias. The number hung in the air, stunning the audience both in the lobby and online. This wasn't a token gesture. This was a serious, 8-figure commitment to fixing a problem that went far beyond their own walls. Third, he continued, his momentum building, we are creating formal, paid internship pipelines with Howard University, Morehouse College, and Spelman College. If we have been systematically excluding talent from historically black colleges and universities, then we will now systematically and aggressively seek it out. He checked his watch. 3:47 p.m. It had been 32 minutes since Karen Miller had first confronted his wife. 32 minutes that had ignited a corporate revolution. He turned his gaze back to Karen, who was still slumped in the chair, a portrait of ruin. "Ms. Miller," he said, his voice cold and final. "Security will escort you from the building. Your access cards have been deactivated. Your company accounts are frozen. You are to have no further contact with any employee of this company." As two different security guards, their faces grim and professional, approached Karen, the phones continued to record her walk of shame. The woman who had wielded power like a weapon against the vulnerable was now powerless, her downfall broadcast to the world. The live stream had now reached over 8,500 viewers. Hashtag Apex Discrimination was trending nationally, alongside hashtag Workplace Justice and hashtag Corporate Accountability. Julian Carter had just turned his wife's public humiliation into a masterclass in leadership. And Dr. Lena Williams had just become the face of workplace equity for millions of people worldwide. The emergency meeting convened at 4:15 p.m. in the executive conference room. The mahogany table, which had hosted billion-dollar deals, was now the center of a crisis control operation. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked downtown Austin, where news vans were already gathering in the parking lot like vultures. Julian sat at the head of the table, his laptop open to a cascading waterfall of notifications. Lena sat to his right, now wearing his spare dress shirt, which he kept in his office over her stained dress. Across from them sat the core leadership team. General Counsel Lisa Park, VP of Operations James Rivera, and CFO Michael Torres. The mood was grim. "The numbers are staggering," Lisa said, her eyes glued to the legal documents on her tablet. "We're facing a potential class action lawsuit from 731 rejected candidates. If we use an average settlement figure of $75,000 per case, which is conservative, we're looking at an initial exposure of nearly $55 million. Michael, running calculations on his own laptop, winced. That doesn't include punitive damages, which a jury would almost certainly award after seeing that live stream. Nor does it include legal fees or the immediate drop in our stock price. We're down 12% since the video went viral an hour ago. That's a loss of over $300 million in market cap." James Rivera, the VP of Ops, leaned forward, the stress evident in his voice. "The board is demanding answers. I have to be honest, Julian. Karen Miller was hired on my recommendation 2 years ago. Her efficiency ratings were off the charts. She screened out 96% of applicants at the initial review, saving us millions in hiring costs." "Efficiency," Julian said, his voice dangerously cold. "That's what we called it. We should have called it what it was, systematic discrimination." Lena opened her research folder, spreading the damning charts across the polished table. "The patterns are undeniable," she said. Karen rejected qualified black candidates at a rate 347% higher than equally or less qualified white candidates. She used coded language in her rejection notes. "Not a cultural fit, lacks polish, might not thrive in our fast-paced environment." She pulled out a specific file. Marcus Williams, graduated from MIT with a 3.9 GPA in computer science. Internships at Google and Facebook. Karen's note reads, "Seems aggressive in interview style. Might intimidate colleagues." Julian read the file, his jaw tightening. What was aggressive about his interview? He asked about advancement opportunities for minority employees and the company's diversity initiatives, Lena replied. Standard questions from any ambitious, top-tier candidate. Lisa Park shook her head grimly. That's textbook discrimination. The EEOC will have a field day with language like that. Intent doesn't matter. Impact does. And our impact has been live-streamed to the world. There's more, Lisa said, hesitating for a moment. The Department of Justice called my office 20 minutes ago. They are opening a formal civil rights investigation into Apex Innovations. Silence filled the room. A federal investigation was a different level of crisis. It meant congressional hearings, relentless media scrutiny, and years of regulatory oversight. There's something else you should all know, Lena said quietly, drawing all eyes to her. My research wasn't limited to Apex. I documented similar, though less extreme, patterns at Technova, Digital Dynamics, and Innovate Corporation. Karen Miller's practices aren't unique. They are systemic across the industry. Julian stared at his wife, a new level of understanding dawning on him. You're saying this is bigger than us. I'm saying Karen learned these techniques somewhere, Lena explained. She attended industry conferences. She worked with other HR directors. She shared best practices for efficient screening. I'm not describing a conspiracy. I'm describing a culture. A culture that prioritizes the illusion of efficiency over the reality of equity. And Karen was a perfect product of that culture. The implications were staggering. They weren't just dealing with a rogue employee. They were dealing with an industry-wide disease. Here's what we're going to do, Julian said finally, his voice firm and decisive. Full transparency. We release Lena's research ourselves. We cooperate completely with the DOJ. We offer immediate, generous, preemptive settlements to all 731 documented cases. We control the narrative by leading the change. He looked at his wife. And Aaliyah, I'm offering you a formal position, effective immediately. Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, reporting directly to me, with full budget authority and a permanent seat on the board. Lena smiled. I accept, on 3 conditions. Name them. First, an anonymous, third-party reporting system for all employees. Second, quarterly diversity audits with the results made public. Third, a formal partnership with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund to monitor our progress. Done, Julian said without hesitation. Lisa looked up from her notes. One last thing. Karen Stone's lawyer just sent a letter. She's threatening to sue for wrongful termination and public defamation. Aaliyah laughed, a sound of genuine, weary amazement. She destroyed her own career by discriminating against 731 people. The live stream just held up a mirror. Let her sue, Julian said firmly. We have 30 witnesses, security footage, and documented evidence of systemic bias. Plus 5 million people who watched her throw water on a woman for the crime of bringing her husband lunch. The crisis meeting was ending, but the real work was just beginning. 1 year later, Dr. Lena Williams stood at the podium of the National Civil Rights Conference in Washington, D.C., addressing an auditorium filled with 3,000 of the nation's top business leaders. Behind her, a large screen displayed the transformation metrics of Apex Innovations, a workforce that was now 47% diverse, a 23% increase in revenue from diverse teams, and a 97% employee satisfaction rating. Workplace discrimination isn't just morally wrong, she said, her voice carrying across the silent hall. It's economically devastating. Companies are losing billions of dollars in revenue and innovation every year by rejecting top-tier talent based on outdated biases instead of proven merit. In the front row, CEOs from Fortune 500 companies were taking notes. The woman who had been drenched and humiliated in a corporate lobby had become the most sought-after voice on workplace equity in the country. The ripple effect of that day had been seismic. The Apex standard, as it can be known, was now taught as a case study at Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton. 12 major corporations had implemented identical reforms. Federal legislation, sparked by the public outcry, now required diversity and pay equity reporting from all companies with government contracts. The live stream that captured Lena's humiliation had been viewed over 47 million times across various platforms. The comments section had become a living archive, a forum where thousands of people shared their own stories of discrimination. This happened to me at Microsoft. I was told I wasn't a cultural fit at Goldman Sachs after 3 perfect interviews. Finally, someone with the power to fight back. These stories created a database of experiences that researchers were now using to identify and combat discriminatory patterns across entire industries. Even the individual players in the drama had been transformed. Frank, the security guard, now ran employee advocacy programs at several tech companies. His story of choosing conscience over fear inspiring others to speak up. Maria, the administrative assistant, was now Apex's vice president of employee relations, Her journey from silent witness to active advocate a testament to the power of individual courage. Even Karen Stone had found a form of redemption through consequence. After her lawsuit was dismissed, she was unable to find work in HR. She enrolled in diversity and inclusion certification programs and now worked for a nonprofit, helping other companies identify and dismantle the very unconscious biases she had once embodied. Her public apology was required reading in business ethics courses across the country. As Lena concluded her speech, she looked directly into the cameras broadcasting live to millions of viewers. Workplace discrimination happens every single day in America, she said, her voice strengthening with conviction. Most victims don't have a CEO husband to protect them, but they deserve the same dignity, the same opportunity, the same justice. If you have experienced discrimination, I am speaking to you now. Document it. Record it if it is safe to do so. Share your story. Your voice has the power to change entire corporate cultures. And if you have witnessed bias and stayed silent, remember that neutrality always enables the oppressor, never the oppressed. Use your privilege to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The audience rose to their feet in a wave of sustained applause. That evening, in their hotel room, Lena and Julian scrolled through the social media responses to her speech. The hashtag Speak Up for Justice was trending worldwide. 20 minutes in our lobby, Julian mused, shaking his head in wonder. It changed everything. No, Lena corrected gently, taking his hand. 20 minutes revealed what was already broken. The change came from all of us refusing to accept it any longer. Their story had become proof that individual courage could spark systemic transformation, that documented injustice could demand accountability, and that love and partnership could be a powerful force against institutional bias. What would you have done in Lena's situation? When faced with that choice between silence and speaking truth to power, what path would you have taken? Share this story with someone who needs to see that quiet strength can move mountains. Comment below with your own experiences, good or bad, because every story shared chips away at the silence where bias thrives. Please comment with respect for everyone's experiences. Subscribe for more real-life stories of resilience, justice, and transformation. Remember, the most powerful weapon against discrimination isn't just anger. It's documentation, strategic action, and the collective refusal to let hate win. Your story could be the one that changes everything.